The iron gate slid shut with a heavy metallic thud just inches from his face. For a moment the world went silent. Not because it was quiet but because his mind refused to process what had just happened. A man who owned everything behind those gates stood outside like a stranger. And the guards inside looked at him like he didn't belong. He adjusted his coat slowly, not out of nervousness but disbelief. He had built this place from nothing. Every brick, every window, every inch of land carried his story. Yet here he was being denied entry to his own home. The tallest guard stepped forward, his hand raised as if stopping a threat. "Sir, you need to leave. This is private property." The words hit harder than any insult ever could. Private property. His property. He looked at the man carefully, studying his face, searching for a sign of recognition. There was none. No hesitation, no doubt, just cold authority. "Do you know who I am?" he asked calmly. The guard didn't even blink. "I don't care who you are, sir. You are not on the access list." Behind the gate another guard chuckled quietly, thinking this was just another confused visitor trying to bluff his way in. But this was no bluff. This was a moment that would change everything. He took a slow breath, then reached into his pocket. Not for anger, not for threats, but for something far more powerful. His phone. The same phone that built empires, closed million-dollar deals, and changed lives with a single call. But before he dialed, he looked up one more time at the men who had just made the biggest mistake of their careers. "You're sure you want to do this?" he asked. The guard crossed his arms, now irritated. "Sir, step away from the gate." That was it. That one sentence sealed their fate. He nodded once as if confirming something to himself. Then he made the call. His voice was calm, controlled, but carried a weight that could shake entire companies. Within seconds everything began to shift. Inside the security room, alarms quietly activated, systems refreshed, and names updated. The same guards who stood so confidently seconds ago had no idea what storm was about to hit them. And the man outside the gate. He wasn't just locked out. He was about to remind everyone exactly who he was. "Tell me something. If you were in his place, would you reveal your power immediately, or would you let the situation unfold just a little longer to teach them a lesson?" He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. That was what made it even more dangerous. The guards expected anger, shouting, maybe even threats. But what they got instead was silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like something is about to break. He slipped his phone back into his pocket after the call, as if nothing important had just happened. The guard closest to the gate smirked slightly. "Another fake call," he whispered to his partner. "Happens all the time." But something felt off. Because the man outside wasn't trying to convince anyone anymore. He simply stood there, calm, composed, almost patient. Like he was waiting for something. Or someone. Seconds passed. Then a minute. Then another. The guards started to relax again, their confidence slowly returning. "See, I told you," the second guard said. "Just another guy trying to act important." But then it happened. A faint buzzing sound came from the security panel. At first it was barely noticeable. Then the screen flickered. One guard turned to look. "Probably just a glitch," he muttered. But the system didn't stop. Access logs began refreshing rapidly. Names appearing and disappearing. Clearance levels shifting. The smirk on the first guard's face slowly faded. "What's going on?" He stepped back toward the control panel, pressing buttons, trying to regain control. But the system wasn't responding the way it should. Then suddenly, a loud, sharp beep cut through the air. Both guards froze. On the screen a single name appeared at the top of the list. Highlighted. "Untouchable. Owner access granted." The words felt like a slap. The guard's throat went dry. He looked back at the man outside the gate. Really looked this time. Not as a stranger. Not as a problem. But as someone they had completely misjudged. The man met his eyes. No anger. No satisfaction. Just a calm expression that made everything worse. Because it meant this wasn't personal for him. It was business. And business had consequences. The gate made a soft mechanical sound. Unlocked. But it didn't open. Not yet. Because now the power had shifted. Completely. Inside the security room, phones started ringing. Multiple lines at once. Urgent. Relentless. The second guard picked one up with shaky hands. Hello. His face drained of color as he listened. Yes, sir. No, sir. We didn't know. I understand, sir. He slowly lowered the phone. What is it? The first guard asked, his voice tight. The answer came out barely above a whisper. They're on their way. Who? The guard swallowed hard. Management. And not the kind you can argue with. Outside the gate, the man adjusted his watch, glancing at the time. Still calm. Still patient. Like a man who knew exactly how this would end. Because he had seen situations like this before. People making decisions based on assumptions. On appearances. On bias. And every single time, they paid the price. A black SUV turned into the driveway at speed. Then another behind it. The guards stepped back instinctively. Their confidence was completely gone now, replaced with something else. Fear. Real fear. The first vehicle stopped near the gate, doors opening quickly. Men in suits stepped out, their faces serious, focused. One of them walked straight to the control panel, barely acknowledging the guards. What happened here? He asked sharply. No one answered. Because no answer would fix what had already been done. The man outside the gate finally took a step forward. Not rushing. Not forcing. Just walking like he belonged. Because he did. The suited man turned, saw him, and immediately straightened his posture. Sir. That one word changed everything. Respect. Recognition. Authority. The guards felt it instantly. And in that moment they understood. They hadn't just made a mistake. They had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. The gate slowly began to open. But now it felt different. Not like access being granted. But like judgment arriving. Let me ask you something. Do you think he's about to show mercy? Or is this where everything falls apart for those guards? The gates opened fully. But no one moved. Not the guards. Not the men in suits. Not even him. Because this moment was no longer about entering a house. It was about consequences. He stepped forward, slowly walking past the guards without even looking at them. That hurt more than anything. Being shouted at would have been easier. Being ignored meant they no longer mattered. Inside the driveway, the suited men stood in a line, waiting. Their posture straight, their expressions tight. One of them stepped forward. Sir, we deeply apologize for this situation. He raised his hand slightly. Not angry. Just enough to stop the words. Apologies don't fix broken systems, he said quietly. The sentence landed like a verdict. The guards exchanged quick, nervous glances. One of them finally gathered the courage to speak. Sir, we were just doing our job. That made him stop. He turned his head just enough to look back. Doing your job, he repeated calmly. Then tell me. Is your job to protect this property? Or decide who belongs based on what you think you see? No one answered. Because they all knew the truth. This was never just about security. This was about judgment. And they had judged wrong. He walked a few more steps, then stopped again. Still not facing them fully. Call every member of the security team here. Right now. The suited man nodded quickly, already making calls. Within minutes more staff began arriving. Some confused. Some worried. Some already sensing what was coming. They lined up near the entrance, the tension growing heavier with every second. He finally turned to face all of them. Now there was no distance. No barrier. Just truth. I built this place from the ground up, he said. Not just the house. The system, the standards, the trust. And today all of that failed at the front gate. His voice never rose. But every word hit harder than shouting ever could. One of the senior guards stepped forward, trying to recover control. Sir, if there has been a misunderstanding, we can review the protocol. He cut him off with a single look. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a decision. A wrong one. Silence fell again. Heavy and suffocating. Then came the moment no one was ready for. Effective immediately, he said. Every security contract tied to this property is terminated. The words echoed like a shockwave. For a second no one reacted. As if their minds refused to accept what they just heard. Then reality hit. Faces changed. Shock turned into panic. Sir, please, one guard said, stepping forward. We have families. We didn't know. Another voice joined. Give us another chance. We'll fix this. We'll make sure it never happens again. He listened. But his expression didn't change. Because this was bigger than one mistake. This was about trust. And once broken, it doesn't come back easily. He walked closer, now standing directly in front of them. If I allow this to slide today, he said. What happens tomorrow? Who else gets judged before being known? Who else gets stopped at a gate that should open for them? No one had an answer. Because the truth was clear. This wasn't just their failure. It was a reflection of something deeper. Something dangerous. The suited manager stepped forward carefully. Sir, the new team is already being arranged. He nodded once. Good. Then he looked back at the guards one last time. Not with anger. But with finality. Learn from this, he said. Because the world is changing. And if you don't change with it, it will leave you behind. He turned and walked toward the house. This time nothing stopped him. The doors opened instantly. As they always should have. Behind him the guards stood frozen. Watching everything they had collapse in minutes. And the silence that followed was louder than anything before. Now tell me. Do you think he made the right decision by firing them all? Or should he have given at least one of them a second chance? The doors closed behind him with a quiet click. Inside everything was exactly as he had left it. Perfect. Organized. Controlled. But the air felt different. Not because of what was inside. But because of what had just happened outside. He walked slowly through the hallway, his footsteps echoing against marble floors. Each step carried weight. Not anger. Not regret. Just reflection. He reached the large glass window overlooking the gate. From there he could still see them. The former security team. Standing in silence. Some with heads down. Some arguing quietly. Some still trying to process how fast their world had changed. He watched them for a moment. Then turned away. Because the decision had already been made. And he didn't look back once decisions were final. A soft voice came from behind. Sir. He turned. It was his assistant. Her face serious but calm. The new security team will be here shortly. He nodded. And the internal report is ready. Another nod. But then she hesitated. There's something else. He looked at her, waiting. The footage. He understood immediately. The entire incident had been recorded. Multiple angles. Clear audio. Every word. Every decision. What about it, he asked. It's already spreading. That made him pause. Not out of fear. But calculation. How far? She took a breath. Too far. Clips are already circulating online. People are reacting. Strongly. He walked back to the window slowly. Outside, flashing lights from incoming vehicles reflected on the gate. Within minutes, this wasn't just a private incident anymore. It was public. And public meant influence. Narrative. Impact. His phone buzzed. Then again. And again. Messages. Calls. Notifications. Business partners. Media outlets. Unknown numbers. Everyone wanted a piece of the story. He picked up the phone, glanced at the screen, then put it back down. Not yet. Because once he stepped into that spotlight, there was no controlling how far it would go. But something about this situation felt different. Because it wasn't just about him. It was about what people saw. What they believed. What they experienced every single day in different ways. He turned back to his assistant. Prepare a statement. Her eyes widened slightly. Public or private? He didn't hesitate. Public. Because silence would say more than words ever could. And right now, silence could be misunderstood. Outside, the new security team arrived, stepping out with discipline, precision, and awareness. They didn't just stand at the gate. They observed everything. Every detail mattered. Inside, he sat down finally. Calm. Focused. He began writing. Not out of anger. But clarity. Each word measured. Each sentence intentional. Because this wasn't about destroying anyone. It was about setting a standard. Minutes later, his assistant returned. It's ready. He read it once. Then again. Then he pressed send. Within seconds, the reaction exploded. Support. Debate. Criticism. Respect. Some people praised his decision. Others questioned it. Some shared their own experiences. Stories that sounded too familiar. The world was watching now. Not just what happened, but what it meant. He stood up again, walking back toward the window one last time. The gate stood open. Clear. Unchallenged. The way it should have been from the start. And in that moment he knew. This was never just about being blocked at a gate. It was about breaking something much bigger. Something invisible. Something people rarely talk about. Now tell me honestly. If this moment went viral in real life, would it create real change? Or would people forget it after a few days like everything else? Morning came with a different kind of noise. Not the quiet calm his home was used to. But a storm. Phones ringing non-stop. News alerts flashing. Voices from every corner of the world reacting. What happened at that gate was no longer just a moment. It had become a message. He stood in his office looking at the screens. Clips of the incident played again and again. The moment the gate stopped him. The guards refusing. The silence before everything changed. People were watching closely. Not just for drama. But for meaning. Some saw power. Some saw injustice. Some saw a reflection of their own lives. His assistant stepped in quickly. It's everywhere. International coverage now. Interviews requests are piling up. He nodded slowly. And the security company? She hesitated for a second. They've issued a public apology. He let out a quiet breath. Of course they had. But apologies after exposure always felt different. Less about truth. More about damage control. What about the guards? Some are speaking out. That caught his attention. He turned fully now. Saying what? That they were following protocol. That they didn't recognize you. That the system failed. He walked closer to the screen, watching one of the interviews. A former guard speaking nervously, trying to defend his actions. We didn't mean any harm, he said. We were just doing our job. The same words from yesterday. But now the world was hearing them. And judging them. He muted the screen. Because this wasn't about repeating excuses. It was about what happens next. His phone rang again. This time he answered. Yes. A deep voice responded from the other end. We need to talk about how far this is going. It was a major investor. Concerned. Careful. Watching the situation closely. He listened quietly. Then replied with calm certainty. This isn't a crisis. It's a correction. There was a pause on the line. Then a slow exhale. Just be careful. Public attention can turn fast. He ended the call. Because he already knew that. But fear of reaction had never built anything great. Action did. Outside the property, the new security team was already in position. Alert. Professional. Different. No assumptions. No hesitation. Just awareness. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted too. Stronger. Sharper. Like a reset had taken place. His assistant returned again. There's one more thing. He looked up. A legal inquiry. Against the previous security firm. Possible discrimination case. That changed the weight of everything. Because now it wasn't just public opinion. It was accountability. Real consequences. He walked slowly toward the window again. Looking out at the same gate. But now it stood as something else. A symbol. Of what happened. And what followed. He spoke quietly. Proceed with it? Her eyes searched his face. Are you sure? This could go much further. He didn't hesitate. It should. Because if no one pushes, nothing changes. And this moment. It wasn't meant to be small. Within hours, legal teams were involved. Statements prepared. Evidence secured. The footage that went viral now became proof. Something that could force real answers. Not just online reactions. But actual change. Across companies. Across systems. Across mindsets. He sat down again, finally allowing himself a moment. Not of rest. But of understanding. This all started with one decision at a gate. One moment where someone chose assumption over truth. And now. It had become something much bigger. The question was no longer about what happened. But what would happen next. Because moments like this either fade away. Or they leave a mark that can't be erased. So think about this. If you had the power to turn one unfair moment into a global message. Would you take that risk? Or would you let it stay just another forgotten story? Days passed, but the noise didn't fade. It grew louder. What started at a single gate had now reached boardrooms, courtrooms, and conversations across the world. His name was no longer just tied to success. It was tied to a moment that forced people to look at something uncomfortable. Inside his office, the legal team laid everything out. Documents. Footage. Statements. Each piece building a case that could not be ignored. The head lawyer spoke carefully. This is strong. Very strong. But once we push forward, there's no quiet exit. This will set a precedent. He leaned back slightly. That was the point. Not revenge. Not headlines. A precedent. Something that would outlive the moment. Across the city, the former security company was already struggling. Contracts under review. Clients asking questions. Trust slipping. Because one incident had exposed a flaw that many never wanted to admit existed. His assistant walked in with another update. Several corporations are reaching out. They want to review their own security policies. He nodded slowly. That was change. Not just talk. Action. Real adjustment. Later that evening, he agreed to his first interview. The room was simple. No dramatic lighting. No distractions. Just a chair, a camera, and truth. The interviewer looked at him directly. Why didn't you just walk away? He answered without hesitation. Because walking away would mean accepting it. And I've spent my life refusing to accept limits placed on me by others. The interviewer paused, then asked the question everyone was thinking. Did you fire them because of what they did? Or because of what it represented? He held eye contact. Both. Because actions and meaning are connected. If you ignore one, you ignore the problem. Clips from the interview spread even faster than the original incident. But this time it wasn't just shock. It was understanding. People weren't just reacting. They were thinking. Companies began announcing new training programs. Policy changes. Accountability systems. Not perfect. But movement. Real movement. Back at the mansion, the gate stood open as always. But now every person who passed through it did so with awareness. With intention. Because that gate had become a reminder of what happens when power meets truth. One evening he stood outside again alone. Looking at the same place where it all started. Quiet now. Almost peaceful. But the weight of that moment still lingered. Not as anger. But as purpose. His phone buzzed one last time that night. A message from someone unknown. Thank you. Just 2 words. But they carried everything. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. Because the impact was already there. Not in messages. Not in headlines. But in change. And that was always the goal. He turned and walked back inside. This time there was no barrier. No doubt. No hesitation. Just forward movement. Because some moments break you. And some moments build something bigger than you. This one did both. Now tell me. Do you think this story ends here? Or is this just the beginning of something even bigger that no one sees coming? The story didn't end. It shifted. Because real impact doesn't fade. It evolves. Weeks later the headlines changed tone. No longer just about the incident. But about the ripple effect it created. Major firms quietly updated hiring policies. Security companies introduced new identification systems. Bias training became mandatory in places that once ignored it. Not because they wanted to. But because they had to. Pressure does that. And he understood pressure better than most. Inside his office things were calmer now. Fewer calls. Fewer alerts. But more meaningful conversations. Leaders asking questions they never asked before. How do we fix what we don't see? That question mattered. Because for the first time, people weren't just reacting. They were reflecting. His assistant walked in with a different kind of update. The former security guards. He looked up. What about them? Some of them are trying to reach you. That made him pause. Not out of anger. But curiosity. Why? She placed a file on the desk. Letters. Apologies. Explanations. And something else. Regret. Real or not? That was harder to judge. He opened one slowly. The handwriting uneven. Words crossed out. Rewritten. Trying to say something difficult. I made a decision in seconds that cost me everything. I didn't see you. I only saw what I thought you were. I was wrong. He read it twice. Then closed the file. Because this was the part no one talks about. After consequences. After headlines. After change. There are still people left behind. Trying to understand what they did. And who they were in that moment. Later that day he stood again near the gate. Not for control. Not for power. But for clarity. The same place. The same view. But a different perspective. Because now he wasn't just the man who was stopped. He was the man who responded. And that difference mattered. A car approached slowly. Not part of the new team. Not scheduled. He watched carefully as it came to a stop. One man stepped out. Hesitant. Nervous. It was one of the former guards. The same one who first told him to leave. For a moment neither of them spoke. The air felt heavy again. But different from before. This wasn't authority. This was accountability. The guard finally stepped closer. "I know I shouldn't be here," he said. "But I had to come." He listened. Calm as always. "I've replayed that moment 100 times. The guard continued. "And every time I see it clearer. What I did. What I assumed. What I ignored." Silence followed. Then the question came. "I just want to know. Was there ever a chance you would have forgiven us?" That was a real question. Not for the cameras. Not for the world. Just for him. He took a breath. Then answered honestly. "Forgiveness and consequences are not the same thing." The guard lowered his eyes. "I understand. But I'm trying to change." That mattered. Because change is the hardest thing to prove. It takes time. Effort. Consistency. He looked at the man in front of him. Not as the guard from that day. But as someone standing in a different moment. "Then prove it," he said. "Not to me. To yourself. Because that's where real change happens." The guard nodded slowly. No arguments. No excuses. Just acceptance. He turned and walked back to his car. Not fixed. Not redeemed. But started. And sometimes. That's enough. The gate remained open. As it should be. But now it stood for something more. Not just access. But awareness. And the man who once stood outside it now understood something even deeper. Power isn't just about control. It's about what you choose to change. And what you choose to leave behind. So think about this. If someone truly realizes their mistake and wants to change, do they deserve a second chance? Or do some actions stay with you forever? The gate stood open, but the story refused to close. Because something had changed inside him. Not the kind of change the world could see in headlines. But the kind that reshapes decisions quietly. Days turned into weeks and the noise outside slowly settled. But inside his world things were still moving. Not faster. Smarter. More intentional. He began reviewing every system connected to his properties. Not just security. Everything. Who gets access? Who makes decisions? How people are judged before being known. Because he knew now. One mistake at the gate was never just one mistake. It was a chain. And chains either break. Or get rebuilt stronger. Meetings became deeper. Less about profit. More about principles. His team noticed it. The questions were different now. What does fairness actually look like in practice? How do you measure respect? Can a system be powerful and still be human? Not everyone had answers. But for the first time, they were asking. And that mattered. One afternoon he gathered a group of leaders from different companies. Not for business deals. But for discussion. Real discussion. No cameras. No media. No pressure. Just truth. He shared the story again. Not the viral version. The real one. The feeling of standing outside something you built. And being told you don't belong. The room went silent. Because many of them had never experienced that. And some had. But never spoke about it. Then he asked one simple question. How many silent gates exist in your systems right now? No one answered immediately. Because the question didn't need a quick response. It needed honesty. After that meeting, something shifted beyond his control. Those leaders went back to their companies. And they started looking closer. At hiring. At promotions. At security. At behavior. Not for mistakes. But for patterns. And patterns started to reveal things no one wanted to admit. Back at the mansion, life felt quieter again. But not the same. Because now every choice carried more awareness. Every decision had weight. One evening his assistant brought him something unexpected. A proposal. He raised an eyebrow. From who? She smiled slightly. From people who want to turn what happened into something bigger. He opened it. A foundation. Focused on fairness in systems. Training. Awareness. Accountability. He leaned back thinking. Because this was the next level. Not reaction. Creation. Building something that could outlast him. But that also meant responsibility. More eyes. More pressure. More expectations. He closed the file slowly. And asked. Do you think this is needed? She didn't hesitate. More than you think. That answer stayed with him. That night he walked again toward the gate. Same place. Different purpose. He stood there looking out. Not at what happened. But at what could happen next. Because the truth was simple. Moments create attention. But actions create legacy. The next morning the decision was made. The foundation would begin. Quietly at first. No big announcements. No dramatic launches. Just work. Real work. Training programs started developing. Companies reaching out voluntarily. Wanting to be part of something that actually mattered. Not for image. But for change. And slowly. The story stopped being about a man blocked at a gate. And became about systems opening doors. Months later. He received another message. From someone he didn't know. Because of what you did. I wasn't ignored today. Simple words. But powerful. He read it once. Then put the phone down. Because that right there. Was the real result. Not fame. Not power. Not even justice. But impact. The kind you don't always see. But you feel. And as he stood there looking at the open gate once more. He realized something important. The biggest victories are not when doors open for you. But when they start opening for others. Now think about this. If you had the chance to turn one moment of disrespect into a movement. Would you build something lasting? Or stop after proving your point? The foundation didn't launch with noise. It started with quiet rooms and uncomfortable conversations. Workshops where people were asked questions they had avoided their entire careers. Executives sitting across from employees hearing things they had never heard before. Stories that didn't fit into reports or numbers. But carried more truth than any data ever could. He attended the first session without announcing himself. No cameras. No introductions. Just a seat in the back. Listening. A young employee stood up, hesitant at first. Then steady. I've been here 3 years, she said. And I still feel like I have to prove I belong every single day. The room shifted. Not dramatically. But enough. Because once something real is said. It can't be unheard. He watched carefully. Not reacting. Not interrupting. Just absorbing. Because this wasn't about him anymore. It was about what was being revealed. Session after session the same patterns appeared. Different voices. Same experience. Different industries. Same feeling. Being questioned before being known. Being measured before being understood. After weeks of this. He made another decision. The foundation would publish a report. Not to expose, but to reflect. A mirror. For companies to see what they usually hide. When the report came out, it didn't go viral the way the gate incident did. But it spread differently. Quietly. Deeply. Powerfully. Because the people who needed to read it did. And they recognized themselves in it. Some changed immediately. Some resisted. Some denied. But none could say they didn't know anymore. One evening his assistant walked in again. "There's something you should see." He looked up. "What is it?" She placed a tablet in front of him. A video. Not from the media. Not from a company. From a small workplace. A security team standing together. Reviewing new training. Talking openly. Correcting each other. One of them said something that made him pause. "We don't decide who belongs. We make sure everyone who belongs feels safe." He replayed that line again. Because that was it. That was the shift. Simple. Clear. Powerful. He leaned back slowly. For the first time since everything started, he allowed himself a small moment of satisfaction. Not pride. Not victory. Just confirmation. That something real had changed. But even then, he knew better. Change is fragile. It needs to be protected. Maintained. Reinforced. Otherwise it fades. And systems go back to what they were. So he kept going. More programs. More discussions. More pressure where needed. Because stopping now would undo everything. Months later he returned to the gate again. Not out of habit. But intention. Standing there. He remembered the exact moment it closed in front of him. And compared it to now. Open. Unchallenged. But more importantly, understood. Because the gate was never the real problem. It was the thinking behind it. And that was what he changed. A car approached. The new guard stepped forward. Professional. Respectful. "Good evening, sir. Welcome home." Simple words. But this time, they carried meaning. He nodded and walked through. No pause. No test. No doubt. Just movement. Forward. And as the doors closed behind him once again, the story didn't feel like something that happened to him. It felt like something that started with him. And continued far beyond. Now ask yourself this. If change takes time, effort and constant pressure, are most people truly willing to carry it forward? Or do they only support it when it's trending? Time passed again. But this time it didn't feel like repetition. It felt like momentum. The foundation had grown beyond its first expectations. Not into something flashy, but into something structured. Schools were beginning to adopt its training modules. Companies were quietly adjusting their internal systems. Leaders who once ignored the conversation were now inviting it in. Not because they were forced, but because they started to see the cost of ignoring it. He no longer appeared in public often. Not because he stepped away, but because he stepped deeper. Into the work. Into the systems. Into the details most people never notice. Because that's where real change survives. One morning he received an invitation. Not a business one. A government advisory panel. Focused on workplace fairness and institutional accountability. His assistant looked at him carefully. "This is big." He read it once. Then again. And said nothing for a moment. Because big wasn't what mattered anymore. Impact was. He accepted. But quietly. No announcement. No press statement. Because he had learned something important. Attention can build awareness. but it can also distort intention. On the day of the first meeting he arrived early. Sitting in a large conference room filled with policymakers, industry leaders and analysts. People who usually shape systems from above. He listened to their discussions. Numbers, projections, frameworks. All important. But something was missing. So when his turn came, he didn't start with data. He started with a question. How many decisions in your systems are made by assumption before understanding? The room went still. Because it wasn't a comfortable question. It wasn't meant to be. He continued. Because the gate I stood outside wasn't just a gate. It was a system deciding before it understood. And that system exists in many forms. In hiring, in promotion, in access, in trust. People shifted in their seats. Because now it wasn't theory. It was experience. One of the senior officials finally spoke. So what do you propose? He paused. Then answered. Systems that verify people before they judge them. Not after. That simple reversal changed the tone of the room. The discussion that followed wasn't easy. There was disagreement. Pushback. Concern about cost and implementation. But also something new. Curiosity. Because even those who resisted couldn't ignore the logic. After the meeting ended, one advisor walked beside him. You realize this will take years? He nodded. Change always does. The advisor looked at him. Why keep pushing then? He stopped walking for a moment. Because I already saw what happens when you don't. That answer ended the conversation. Later that night he stood once again at the mansion gate. Same place. Same structure. But now it felt different. Not like a barrier. Not like a symbol of exclusion. But like a reminder of responsibility. Because it represented both what had failed and what had been rebuilt. His phone buzzed. A message from the foundation team. New report shows decrease in reported bias incidents in partner companies. He read it once. Then looked up at the open sky. No celebration. No announcement. Just quiet acknowledgement. Because progress like this doesn't arrive loudly. It builds silently. Until one day. It becomes normal. And that is the real victory. He turned back toward the house. And as he walked inside, he understood something deeply. The gate was never the story. It was the trigger. The real story was what people chose to do after it. Now think about this. If one moment can expose a system flaw, should we wait for such moments to happen? Or should systems be designed so they never happen at all? Years later, the incident at the gate had become something people referenced more than replayed. Not as entertainment anymore, but as a case study. In meetings. In universities. In leadership trainings. A simple moment that exposed how quickly judgment can replace understanding. But for him, it was no longer about that night. It was about what grew from it. The foundation had expanded globally. Partnering with institutions in different countries. Each one adapting the same core principle. No access decisions without verified context. No assumptions without accountability. No authority without awareness. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever is. But it was changing outcomes. In ways that could be measured. And in ways that couldn't. One afternoon he was invited to speak at a global leadership summit. A large hall filled with CEOs, policymakers and innovators. People who had influence over systems that shaped millions of lives. He walked onto the stage without introduction. Because at this point, he didn't need one. The room settled quickly. Expecting data. Expecting strategy. But he started differently. He began with silence. Then a simple line. Most systems are not built to exclude. They are built without thinking who gets excluded. That sentence stayed in the air, Heavy. Clear. Unavoidable. He continued. I once stood outside a place I built. And I was told I didn't belong. Not because of who I was. But because of what someone assumed I was. And in that moment, I realized something important. Systems don't need intention to cause harm. They only need blind spots. The audience listened closely. Because this wasn't theory. It was lived reality. He shifted slightly. And then asked the room. How many of your systems would recognize you if your name was removed? No titles. No reputation. No status. Just a person. The silence grew deeper. Because the question didn't allow easy answers. After a pause, someone finally asked. So what is the solution? He didn't hesitate. Design systems that slow down judgment. And speed up understanding. Because when people are rushed, they guess. And guessing is where mistakes begin. The conversation that followed lasted hours. Not surface level. But structural. Real changes being discussed at global scale. After the event, he stepped outside alone. The city lights stretching far into the distance. His assistant walked beside him quietly. You still think about that night, don't you? He didn't answer immediately. Because the truth was. Yes. But not in the way people assumed. Not as anger. Not as revenge. But as origin. Because everything that followed started there. She looked at him. Regret. He shook his head. No. Awareness. There's a difference. They stood there for a moment in silence. Then she asked softly. Do you think it was worth it? He looked at the city. All of it? The foundation. The changes. The conversations. The systems shifting slowly across places he would never even visit. And he answered honestly. Yes. But not because of what happened to me. Because of what didn't have to happen to others after. That was the real outcome. Back at the mansion, the gate still stood. But it no longer represented a barrier in his mind. It represented evolution. Because it reminded him how quickly systems can fail. And how long it takes to fix them. But also, that change is possible. If someone is willing to carry it beyond a single moment. Inside, he placed the foundation report on his desk. Updated figures showing continued improvement across partner organizations. Not perfection. But direction. Forward. And that was enough. For now. Before leaving the room, he paused one last time. Thinking not about what he had built. But what would continue without him. Because that was the true test of any change. Not whether it starts. But whether it survives. Now ask yourself this. If a single moment can change systems across the world. What everyday moments are we still ignoring today that might be just as important? The years didn't erase the gate incident. They refined its meaning. What once felt like a single confrontation had turned into something much larger. A reference point for how systems either protect people or fail them. But for him, life had moved into a different phase now. Quieter in appearance. He was no longer chasing visibility. He was building permanence. The foundation had become self-sustaining. Led by teams he personally trained in its early years. People who understood the mission without needing reminders. Fair access. Verified understanding. Bias awareness built into process, not speeches. One morning, he received an invitation he didn't expect. A global award for institutional impact. Not for wealth. Not for business success. But for systemic change. His assistant placed it on his desk carefully. You should accept this. He looked at it for a long time. Then stood up. I will. But not for me. That evening, the ceremony hall was full. Bright lights. Elegant setting. Powerful names in attendance. He walked onto the stage once again. But this time there was no tension. No expectation of confrontation. Just recognition. He looked at the audience for a moment before speaking. And when he did, his voice was calm. What happened at that gate was never the important part. The important part was what it revealed. Because systems don't fail in moments. They fail in design. And design can always be improved. He paused. I didn't change the past. But I helped build something that reduces its repetition. That is enough. Applause followed. Not loud at first. But growing. Not because of emotion. But because of understanding. After the ceremony he stepped outside alone again. The night air was cool. The world felt the same. But also not. Because somewhere, in places he would never see. A guard paused before making a decision. A manager asked one more question before rejecting someone. A system required verification before assumption. Small delays. Small changes. But meaningful. His assistant joined him quietly. It's done. He nodded. No. It started. He looked toward the distance for a moment. Then asked softly. Do you think people remember the gate now? She thought for a second. Some do. But most remember what it became. He smiled slightly. That was the goal. They began walking. No cameras now. No audience. Just movement forward. And as the city stretched ahead of them, he understood something simple. The gate was never about being stopped. It was about what happens after someone decides they will not accept being defined incorrectly. Because some moments are not endings. They are ignition points. And what burns after them depends entirely on what people choose to build. So if someone asks where the story ends, the answer is simple. It doesn't. It continues. Every time a system chooses understanding over assumption. And every time a door opens. Before someone has to prove they deserve it.